Everyone does some kind of last-minute revision. It's not a bad thing, it's just a form of exam preparation. Let's talk about how to make the most of cramming. Welcome to the Field Guide to Study. All study is on a spectrum. One end, consistent, careful study over time. At the other, cramming, getting lots of material into your head as quickly as possible. You don't have to choose between them. Ideally, you do both. But it's very common to end up with just the latter, cramming. We've all been there. Cramming has a bad reputation. Sitting down a day before the exam, try to get in as much as possible, disorganized, last-minute panic. But let's give it some perspective. On that day, before the exam, what do you think organized students are doing? The students with excellent revision schedules over semester. They're cramming, trying to cover as much material as possible. Everyone's cramming. The difference is, they're probably doing it without the panic. Because that's the thing. Cramming isn't bad. Don't attach moral judgments to study. Don't beat yourself up. If you're studying, good. But we know from research that cramming carries risk. We know the content doesn't stick as well. But sometimes you just gotta cram. So how do you do it responsibly? Whether you studied all semester or you're desperately studying for the first time, the approach is mostly the same. Step 1, you plan. Step 2, you cram. You'll be tempted to skip planning when you cram. Don't. You're about to invest your most precious resource, time. You need to work out how you can invest little bits of time for big returns. And that's always worth it. And you can only do it if you plan. First step, decide when to study. Specifically, how much time you are going to dedicate to each aspect of the course, like modules or lectures. Think of an average university course with 10 modules. You've got 10 hours of cramming available. In this case, it makes sense to assign 1 hour to each module. You need to do these calculations to build a unit of study. Each unit should be a fixed amount of time. Pomodoro technique is a good way of managing this. You then build those units into a production line. The goal is to churn through content one unit after the other. What you want to avoid in cramming is being reactive. This is the ultimate trap. You start cramming, you realize you don't understand, so you dig deeper and deeper. Suddenly, 3 hours have passed and you only got through one lecture. And now, there isn't enough time to study the rest. You avoid this kind of reactive study by proactively building units of study with fixed amounts of time. The next step of planning, organize yourself. Every decision you make in study is mental energy that could have otherwise been dedicated to learning. You don't want to waste mental energy on non-study, so make all your decisions at the beginning. Even the really basic ones, such as where you're going to study. It's a straightforward question, but physical location makes a difference. Where is your preferred place to study? Maybe there's a particular location you study best. Everyone's different. Think about what works best for you. The important step is to make this decision now, so you don't think about it later. On a similar note, decide what to study and collect the required resources. Have everything you need to study on hand. Download handouts, collate notes, get hold of textbooks. You've thought about time, you've got your place, and you've got your content. The next thing is to work out what will you do, how to actually cram. The first step in cramming is accepting you're not going to have time to deeply understand everything. You are going for breadth, not depth. That's not a bad thing. It's just the reality of cramming. The key with all cramming is to focus on the process, not the outcome. Don't think too hard about whether it's all making sense or that you understand what's going on. Focus on the process. To ensure your process is working, focus on the kind of study you're doing. Study techniques at a high yield. We're all familiar with standard study, reading, listening, watching lectures. They're all key ways to get information in your head. But remember, you'll get better yield if you use active retrieval. Do some flashcards, or if you don't have any flashcards, try covering up your notes and then attempt to recall the information. This will be more effective than just reading. Do questions, quizzes, question banks, past exam papers. These force active engagement with the information, making it more likely to stick. If you don't have questions, try explaining concepts out loud. Remember, this all helps, even if you don't get the correct answers. It's the attempt that matters. Doing multiple study techniques when you cram might feel risky, like you might miss some of the information, but it's actually less risky as high-yield study increases the likelihood you'll capture information as you go. A useful way to incorporate multiple techniques and minimize risk is to do what I call the cram sandwich. To do this, you sandwich different study techniques together. Usually you try to do something factual, then conceptual, then factual. For example, watch a lecture, factual. Do some practice questions, conceptual, and then read your notes, factual again. By sandwiching these techniques together, you increase the likelihood of deeper understanding taking place. Lastly, remember that all learning works better if you do it over time. Even if you're cramming on the day before the exam, you will learn better if you space things out. Even if that means studying something in the morning and returning to it in the evening. Cramming works best when you build a sense of control over what you're doing. It's obviously easy to lose that sense of control with impending exam anxiety. That's why you run through the planning we've just discussed. Take time at the beginning to make decisions. Avoid making decisions while you study. Build a study production line. Organize yourself. Collect all your resources. Work out how you're going to study. Ultimately, it will come down to how much time you have. Remember, even 5 minutes of study can be effective if you do it as part of a greater system. All study adds up, and cramming is just the icing on the cake.